Okay, welcome everybody to this session, Innovating Through the Crisis, one of our final sessions on Innovation Week. And I'd like to thank everybody who has participated. We've had 50 speakers so far, and we've had 3,500 people logging in, tuning in, listening to our various chats over the last week. So that's absolutely fantastic. And I'd like particularly at the outset to thank all the organisers and everybody who was involved in organising what has been to date a very successful week. So we're going to have a very successful session now. So we're going to talk about, as I said, innovating through the crisis. So we all know what we're going through is unprecedented pandemic, which has had major implications for our economy, for our society, for how we all work and how we work in the public service and how we deliver for our citizens. So we're going to have on the panel a number of people who are going to talk about their experiences, talk about the things they've been doing, what they've been doing differently, and how they've been innovating. So on the panel, I'll just run through the list of the panelists first, and then we'll start the conversation. So we have Vice Admiral Mark Mellett, Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces. So welcome, Mark. We've got Shirley Comerford, CEO of Public Appointment Service, previously of Deeper. So she learned all our good habits from Deeper. AnnMarie Farrelly, CEO of Fingal. Welcome, AnnMarie. Dr. Orlaigh Quinn, SecGen in the Department of Business. Julie Sinnamon, CEO of Enterprise Ireland, and Garda Commissioner Drew Harris from Garda Síochána. So you're all very welcome. Maybe what I'll do is turn to Mark, first of all, the Chief of Staff. Mark, you might just give us a sense of how the pandemic has changed the organisation, the way you're working, how you're delivering on behalf of citizens. You might just give us some flavour of the type of challenges you face and how you're responding to those. Over to you, Mark. Yeah,
thanks very much. I suppose if we look back at February, we were all in that phase of uncertainty. We all were hearing the news about this virus in Asia, but not really realising the impact. And I think it was towards the end of February we began to see potential mortality rates, and that began to make us think. And we established a joint operation planning group. And into early March, then we stood up a joint task force. And effectively, that was using our routine procedures to get ready for something that was unknown. And a joint task force is about getting rid of silos, bringing in the various service providers into a one-stop shop. And we went a step further, and it was on the basis of our experience in dealing with Ebola in West Africa. We created a joint task force around what we call a joint interagency task force, because right at that stage, we didn't know if the institutions would survive the impact of the COVID virus. So I established comms with Drew. I think we both attended a National Security Committee meeting, and from a Defence Forces point of view, we were put on priority call to the HSE. And at that stage then, we were looking at how do we create, I suppose, field hospitals, what transport will be required, how can we task organise our personnel. And in fairness to Paul Reid, he put something into our joint task force, and it shifted from being just military into an agency that could work with the primary response agencies. And we started then shaping, and we started then preparing. And the first response, I think, was to start looking at how we can help the testing effort. And we used our ships. Some of our ships had been involved in the migrant crisis in the Mediterranean, and they were well used to operations with PPE. I think we didn't even know, most of us, what PPE meant back in March. We all know what PPE is now. And so straight away we had teams, a ship into Dublin, a ship into Galway, a ship into Cork, helping on the testing side. The next problem that hit us was Paul rang and said, I need tracers. And we needed a workforce. And at that stage we were going in towards lockdown. And we then deployed our cadets out of the military college, the best of Irish women and men, youngsters who most of them were just post-leaving cert, but there were a few months in training, and then they turned to HSE, trained them up, and then we had a cohort of testers. And then the next step was the actual getting PPE. And you recall, I think nearly 160 flights in from China with PPE, tens of thousands of tons of PPE. We facilitated that, working with the Garda, getting it to distribution points. And so this joint task force in many ways was the innovation, because what it did was it separated out our effort for COVID away from the meat and two veg, the business continuity piece, because we didn't want to take our eye off the importance of being able to respond in an agile manner towards the requirements of government in terms of dealing with COVID. And we created resilience in terms of the headquarters, which was a gymnasium. And just a funny story on the gymnasium. I remember, giving the word on getting the gymnasium stood up. And the first thing came back to me, it'll take 2 weeks to wire it. And I remember just looking and rolling my eyes and say, listen, I'll be over at 2 o'clock myself. I'll wire it myself. I think the message got through. And I never in my career have ever used the phrase, what part of the order do you not understand? But I did use it in the context of COVID. And getting that joint task force stood up was probably the best decision we made.
I guess being in the army that you can order people around, Mark, is very helpful, because some of us would like to do that sometimes, but we don't have necessarily those legal powers that you would have in the army. But can I just ask about the whole logistics support, because I think it's something that people wouldn't necessarily see. They might see some of your colleagues on the TV doing the tracing work, but they don't necessarily see the logistical work that you've done behind the scenes. So you might just give us some flavour of what you're doing in terms of PPE and other supports you're providing.
Yeah, I wasn't the ordering side. What was critical was the support from our minister and the department in terms of creation and institutionalising the joint task force, because we didn't need a single point of truth, and so therefore he had to have an authority to draw on resources such as transport from the GOC of the Southern Brigade, Paddy Flynn, or from the GOC of the Defence Forces Training Centre, Dave Dignam, or from Tony Cudmore in Dublin. They all hold, if you like, the large trucks you see. They hold the resources in terms of personnel. And then Brian Cleary, who was the actual, and is the Joint Task Force commander, he was authorised by government and by the minister in an order to be able to pull resources together and task organise as required. And that meant then working with the HSE, working with Aer Lingus, and working with the Aer Lingus and the Dublin Airport in terms of getting our resources to the various flights coming in, getting the stuff packed and onto distribution hubs. And it was a huge logistic challenge. And not just on that side, we also had to look at other kind of unique types of services on the transport. For instance, as we all know, oxygen is a key element in terms of the recovery process, in terms of step down and also in ICUs. And there was a concern that we may need to actually have to increase the level of production of oxygen and the distribution network for oxygen. So we trained up quite a few drivers who would be able to carry gas such as oxygen to the various centres in terms of the HSE, the regional groupings in terms of the hospital. So that was it in terms of, it was a full scale. I think to date we've actually deployed nearly 45,000 man days, over 6,000 vehicle movement, a huge amount in terms of patrol days, tentage operations out to various hospitals. The issue with regards to triage, hospitals didn't want to have COVID coming into A&E. So what the military did in many cases was support by creating a tentage arrangement outside the hospital so that COVID could be triaged and kept away from A&E.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. I might turn to Commissioner Harris now. Drew, you might just give us some flavour of the Guards are now on the front line here. Once again, now that we're to level 5, and we can see the visible presence of the Garda on the streets, particularly from yesterday. You might just give us some sense, Drew, particularly around the culture of engagement, the way in which the Guards are trying to change the way in which they engage with the public in this pandemic, because I know it's very different. They're trying to encourage people to do the right things, and we talk about the 4 E's and that approach. So you might just give us some sense of the culture of engagement and how you're trying to get the force to respond to this pandemic.
Garda Síochána as an organisation has taken great pride in its long history of being very much a community-based policing service. And for a lot of the members, actually, they refound something which may just have been less talked about in recent years, but just this was an opportunity really to reach out a hand and to help others. We found that there was a lot of people who were a little isolated, and even just because of the travel restrictions were isolated from other family, etc. And we then provided really through community policing and outreach another sort of safety net for them to get in contact with. If we could help them, we did. If we weren't able to help them, we tried it. We always find somebody who could. And I always remember the image of being up in Blanchardstown in the Dunn's supermarket, and I found 6 members walking around with shopping lists, doing shopping in about the 3rd week of April. So really practically helping people who were at that time shielding at home. So, and actually that gave the organisation a great sense of purpose. So we were very conscious that we had to respond to COVID-19. We're an essential service. We had to adjust our working patterns, around our stations, shifts, patrolling, PPE, all of those things. But we're also very conscious of other ongoing issues as well, and making sure that we were protecting people. So things like domestic abuse very regrettably showed an increase throughout the year. It's 18% higher this year than last year. But also then organised crime, and a real focus then on the organised crime groups who the pandemic affected as well, because they became in a bit of a state of flux, and then that gave us operational and intelligence opportunities that we've exploited as well. But I would say for ourselves, we did look across the experience, both into Europe via Europol, but also then across the world with Interpol, and particularly we learned valuable lessons from what was happening in South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan around the policing experience there, and then what we could see then developing obviously in Italy at the time, but also Spain. And I was very determined, as were the leadership team, that we would put our best foot forward around community support and assurance, and the organisation responded very quickly. And it wasn't really a change of culture for us. The behaviours fell into place very quickly, and people, and my own people, actually, it was a real sort of boost of morale for them, that they were able to help people, and also, people are very grateful as well for their input. So we feel that bit worked well. We've had the restart yesterday again, regrettably, and the same principles will apply for the next 6 weeks. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Drew. And do you find that you're hoping to hold on to like that sense of common purpose, that some of your members might have been galvanized in many ways by the role they've been able to play, and they've really seen how important the Garda Síochána, the role they do play in society? Do you think that is something you can hold on to more of that into the future, Drew, post-COVID, in terms of the attitude of members and how they see their job and their role?
Well, I think there's a couple of things around that. They've seen, one, the public good that their work is, and that's been very clear in terms of just the assistance that provided to this society in dealing with the pandemic, and the thanks they've got for that and the recognition of it. So, people are feeling very positive about that, and we want to hold on to that. There's an obvious first for community and policing for engagement with Garda, so we want to hold on to that throughout this period as it goes on. I did press there 10 o'clock, and I made the comment, that this will pass, and we want to make sure that we as an organisation, as a public service, comes out of this better than we went into it. Certainly we don't want to cause damage to our long-term relationship with the public, and there is obviously a first for community policing, but we're also very mindful that this creates opportunities for other crime, and we need to be alive to that and providing a service there around the prevention and detection of crime. And part of that's domestic abuse, but there's also a lot of other fraud around investment fraud and romance fraud, which is rife in terms of people being a bit isolated and then a bit vulnerable to internet connections and relationships then. So it's a tricky enough time in terms of placing the amount of demands on us. But I keep on thinking, where are we going to be 2, 3, 5 years out? And, we want to be in a strong place looking back on this as well, and have at least maintained, but very much hopefully enhanced our reputation and enhanced then our relationship and confidence then in Garda Síochána.
Thanks, Drew. And I think it's a very important message, that the hope message as well, that we all have to give to our staff, that we will get through this, that this pandemic will pass. Obviously, it's regrettable that we're back with this lockdown, a partial lockdown, but we will get through it. And I think that is important that we keep on saying that to our own staff and colleagues, because people will have tough times, particularly over the next 6 weeks. So it's an important message. Thanks, Drew. Maybe AnnMarie, Farrelly, CEO of Fingal, which I think, AnnMarie, if I'm not mistaken, is it the biggest, one of the biggest local authority areas in the country, if not the biggest, with a young and expanding population. So, AnnMarie, you might just give us some sense of how you've tried to respond to the challenges posed by COVID.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, we are one of the biggest and the youngest and most diverse population in the country, with some of the biggest towns as well. So, like Drew mentioned, we're an essential service as well. So really it was all about business continuity from day one. And across the local government sector, I suppose we worked together to make sure there was no duplication of effort as we planned to deliver our service and come up with standards way of operating so that we could protect the staff. So very much it was about mobilising quickly and delivering those essential services. People couldn't travel more than 2 kilometres from their homes. So some of our commuter towns, the likes of Balbriggan, Lusk, Skerries, people were staying in those towns all of the time. They were out walking with their children. They were getting to know their place very well, probably better than ever before. So our services were really important to them, and we needed to keep the grass cut in the parks. And again, the problems were arising, so we needed that piece of collaboration. The Commissioner mentioned, the Garda out doing the shopping in Blanchardstown. We were asked on a Saturday afternoon, I think it was, to establish a community call as a sector, and we needed to have the helpline open on Monday morning at 8 a.m. So innovation in terms of just to start making that happen overnight, I suppose, and then secondly, making sure we could coordinate the volunteers to deliver the service. So I went about, I suppose, calling volunteers, the agencies in the area, the GAA, the Garda on a Saturday afternoon. And the most common response was, what can we do to help? How do we get it done? So that effort that was available from each sector, from the local population, was really helpful. I suppose in addition to that, we had essential work, which was clear how we might go about getting that done. But then we had important work that we needed to get done as well to make sure we could continue to deliver government programmes or our own work programmes locally. So we had to set about accelerating our digitisation as a workforce. We delivered 800 laptops since March. We have, people working from their kitchen tables up, answering 500 calls a day through our customer service unit. So where we started the year with a digital transformation strategy that was to be a 2 to 3 year program. We found ourselves pushing that along, making sure, I suppose, delivering what should have been an 18-month program over about 6 months. Obviously still more to do, but that was one of the ways we tried to make sure there was no interference in our delivery of services. So again, it was.
Marie, sorry for cutting. Have you found that delivering some of these changes, in effect, the resistors and those people who want to slow things down or maybe don't jump on board, that they've nowhere to go when we face a crisis? And we always have this conversation in the civil and public service in Ireland, that we're good in a crisis, but we're not as dynamic as we should be outside of crisis times. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that characterization, but do you get the sense that, when you're pushing digital, you can do it much faster because you really got no choice? And how has that experience worked for you?
Yeah, so necessity is the mother of invention. Basically it had to be done. You had to get it done. Public servants, I suppose, to an extent, are feeling good about themselves right now because they are being recognised by the public. So that gives a bit of confidence to people to embrace change. It's not easy, though. That delivering the technical solutions is probably the easiest part, although it's intensive in terms of man hours. But getting people who are working remotely, working cohesively and collaborating together and maintaining that teammate ethos is hard. It does require early interventions in terms of training for new ways of working. But I wouldn't like the impression to be given that you can simply transform and it's effortless and seamless. It takes ongoing effort. And I suppose as you move through the pandemic and the various changes, as we move through various levels, closing, opening, closing again, all of that is quite difficult. But I suppose when you're faced with vulnerable groups, for example, in the community call, and people recognise their needs, then you'll find people will adapt quickly to do what has to be done. The Restart Grant is another example. 100 businesses. They were the local retailers and hospitality sectors and those businesses that people relied on. So people understood you needed to get the money into their bank accounts quickly. So, that sort of understanding of what the problem is does help deliver the change.
Thanks, AnnMarie. And just a call out for the Borrow Box scheme with the libraries, which is absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I've just downloaded this morning 100 days, 100 years of solitude, which might be appropriate for this weekend's reading. So I just say it's absolutely fantastic facility, which basically the library service going online, and the numbers have increased enormously over the last 6 months. AnnMarie?
Yeah, people found us that didn't know we were there before digitally. So, the people just availed of all of our online services. We spent a lot of time promoting them too and trying to help people understand how to use them. So we didn't close in libraries. We basically just changed the way we were operating, and we probably reached new customers, which was really good, and they'll stick with us. So I suppose you can, from Mellett to Mizenhead, you get the same service in libraries, which is always good in terms of standardisation. So yeah, absolutely great interest in libraries again, which is always good.
Fantastic, and really important for a lot of people, particularly over the period ahead. They can access reading, and it really is amazing. Thanks, AnnMarie. So obviously, for all our organisations, we need staff, and we need to recruit, and we've had to recruit a lot of people over the last 6 months into the health service in particular, but other areas. So Shirley, Comerford in past is tasked with this recruitment, and it's even more challenging when we can't do our normal face-to-face, Shirley. We can't do the normal way we recruit and select people. So it's been really transformative for past. So it might just give us some sense of how you've, in effect, changed your business model to keep things going. Sure. With COVID.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Look, obviously, when this all started, when you think about what we do, we realised how critical it would be for us to continue to provide services to our clients, because, again, we recruit across the public sector, and we recruit some vital roles. So we knew fairly quickly that we had to move quickly on this. So what this meant for us, though, I suppose, was two things. One, we had this big sudden disruption in terms of our delivery model. As you said, we were no longer able to hold face-to-face interviews. So that was one thing. And then the other thing was that, like lots of other organisations, we had to set all of our staff up to work remotely. So no mean task. We had to adapt all of our processes, and whilst we were doing that, we had to make sure that we would be maintaining the standards in terms of the delivery, and also that we were going to continue to comply with our codes of practice, etc. So again, I suppose the health and safety and welfare of both our staff, our board members, people who participate in interview panels for us, and candidates who interact with us remotely. These are all things that we were acutely aware of. So I suppose what we were trying to do then, and we realised we had to do, was to try and increase our engagement with all of those audiences using lots of different mediums, including our CRM, our website, social media, LinkedIn. We also had to support our clients to navigate through this. And we had adopted an approach where done was better than not. So we decided that as we were going and as we were innovating, that we would collect feedback both from board members, from candidates, from clients, to make sure that the changes that we were implementing were effective, and to tweak as we went as we went through the changes. So I suppose for us, in terms of it was the key challenges, was to keep the show on the road from a business as usual perspective, but also to try and provide some additional support to our colleagues in the HSE by taking over some of their critical clinical recruitment. And then we were also tasked with the design and the implementation of the temporary assignment scheme. Now, this is something that we did in collaboration with our colleagues across DEPR, the Department of Health, the Department of Education, the HSE, and An Garda Síochána. And it was really, really a rapid piece of work with a sense of creating a network of resources that would be available across the public sector should they be needed to redeployed or to temporarily assign into sectors that may have been affected as we went through the pandemic. Because when we think right back to the beginning, we were anticipating that the absenteeism rate and things like that from work was going to be in the region of about 50%. So we understood that there were critical services that we may need to deploy public servants too. So at one stage, we had 27,000 public servants on standby for temporary assignment across the sector. So they were some of the things that we, like other organisations, had to implement over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks.
And I think one of the aspects as well that the demands on the public service some of them have increased dramatically. So we had to, within a very short number of weeks back in March, we had to pay, but people needed income support through the pandemic employment payment, and over 600,000 people received payments within a very short period of time. And Shirley, you might just talk, I know there was a big technological solution by the Department of Social Protection, but there was an awful lot of staff moved in and transferred in, and you were involved in managing those panels and the assignment of staff, which is a big logistical challenge for your colleagues.
Yeah. So I suppose that's one of the things that's quite unique about PAS. We know that we do large volume very, very well, and then managing panels and managing to move people back and forth and that type of thing. So our CRM team worked really, really closely with clients to understand what their needs were. There were some central structures that had been set up that sort of eased communications between various departments and between sectors. So we made sure that we were tapping into all of those so that we could, I suppose, build up that sort of jigsaw of what was happening across the public sector. And then obviously we would have had panels and things like that we would have had there anyway. So we quickly deployed those also. But just to give people a sort of a sense of the volume of the things that we were dealing with. Since COVID, we've had something like 57,000 applications. We've assessed over 67,000 people. We've had something like 5,068 Zoom meetings with 40,000 participants. So you can imagine just how frenetic the activity was. But I think, as I said, those central structures really enabled some quick decision making, a lot of senior leaders involved, but working collectively with that common sense of purpose really enabled us to move and respond very quickly.
Thanks, Shirley. I think one of the things we're really going to have to do is document all these changes and the activity and the numbers, so that when after this we stand back and look at the change and look at the amount of activity, because I think it is phenomenal. A lot of it is not seen, and people just assume it happens, but an awful lot of work takes place. So thanks, Shirley. Next we turn to Dr. Orlaigh Quinn, who's Secretary General in the Department of Business Enterprise Innovation, and we're almost there with everybody. We've Julie after Orlaigh. But Orlaigh, as well as the service delivery piece, there's been a lot of policy innovation, and you and I and Chairman Cody were up all night trying to think about a wage subsidy scheme back in March, which we'd never done before. We've had restart grants and commercial rates waivers, and now we've new schemes to support people. So you might just give us some sense of how you and your colleagues in the department have had to adjust the way you work, the way you think in response to this crisis.
Okay, thanks, Robert, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see everybody so interested in this topic. It's actually very fresh with me because yesterday we did our internal recognition awards for innovation. So we obviously responded from the business community immediately when the pandemic started, and I was struck with Mark mentioning there about the PPE equipment. So the first thing we did was set up a team with Health, HSE and ourselves to source that equipment in China. And we used our IDA colleagues and our colleagues in the embassy there as well. And obviously we had to get the quality. It was an area that none of us had ever worked in before in terms of PPE. So that was the first piece. We immediately, like others, moved to remote working, and we set up a COVID business call centre remotely. So we had colleagues, volunteers, and I have to say I am struck by the number of people who have put their hand up when we've put the call out. We need this, we need that. So again, that's taken 9 inquiries from the business sector. The other area AnnMarie mentioned, and I'll come back to it, the restart grants. We have paid almost 100,000 businesses now on restart grants, and again 700 million. So designing of schemes, and I'll touch on that in a moment, Robert, as you said. The other area we looked at very strongly and we put immediately online, and a project, as we've all said, that could have taken upwards of months, our employment permits. So our employment permits was both manual and automatic, but all of it had to go automatic. We prioritised medical work permits for people coming into the country, and we processed to allow 1,200 doctors, nurses and radiographers to come in between March and June. So again, colleagues working from home have completely automated that service that we now provide. The other services that we automated was the Labour Court and the WRC, where they're now doing virtual court hearings, which they'd never done before. Up to yesterday, 35% of the court hearings were online, virtual. Today, 100%, because again, in lockdown, they have to move. Another area, again, which we don't have direct levers, but we work with all the time, is the retail sector. So again, very strong dealings with colleagues on the retail in terms of, and again, all of that renewed again this week in terms of the lockdown. What can sell, what can't, all of the work we did, Robert, as you'll recall, about the regulations, the guide. And then overpinning all of that, the Health and Safety Authority in terms of working safely in the workplace and the work we did there as well. So that's again being revised in the current climate, but again, huge response from a very small office and people stepping up to do things that they had never done before. So a lot of the work we have done has been very much involved with other agencies, other departments. So then if I turn to the specifics you mentioned, our policy development, as you say, has been done in jig time. The restart grant I've mentioned, 700 budget has gone, doubled from about 900 million to 2 billion. And that restart grant was delivered through the local enterprise offices and the local authorities that had never done this work before. So again, it was a huge collective and collaborative effort of people stepping up and delivering. The wage subsidy scheme, again, hadn't done it before, working very closely with yourselves in pair, with the revenue commissioners, with the Department of Finance and the Department of Social Protection on the pandemic payment. But like I think we all remembered, we're so used to the revenue commissioners collecting money, but here actually it's the opposite, and it's sending money out to keep businesses live, which is what we're trying to do, to try and keep all of the viable businesses, even if they have to close temporarily, to give them the supports to remain viable, keep people in employment. I mean, we saw 600,000 people losing their jobs. So the scale of that, the impact on society, families. So all of the work we did collectively was to support people, and the rates that we set and we worked on with colleagues in the Department of Social Protection, like huge amount of work. And then I just want to mention, and I know Julie will come in on it as well in more specifics, but I've mentioned the restart, but we upended our business support, our business schemes, working with Enterprise Ireland, with the IDA, again, across other sectors to just really try and keep as many businesses as we could open. And, you know, we have seen the benefits of that in terms of the tax take, in terms of the support for government finances, where the sectors that we are supporting are able to remain open after much and much policy analysis of what's safe and what isn't. And, you know, we've all had discussions on that. So I would say right across the board for us, in every one of our agencies, we've 16 agencies, we have had a huge COVID response and a COVID impact. And staff have just been amazing in terms of stepping up, collaborating, delivering, doing things we never would have thought possible, and doing them to a high standard and just getting stuck in. And with all of the concerns, and you mentioned them at the beginning of the session, Robert, you know, the isolation, the lack of teams, all of that. But huge, I have to say, I'm hugely proud of what we have done and what we have delivered. I'll stop there because I could take over the whole session on this. So,
No, thanks.
Thanks.
Just before I come to Julie, just on that piece about keeping engaged with staff, like so. In government departments now, your department, my department, most people are now working from home today. 95% of people will be working from home. And how do you keep in touch, and do you have any sort of practical steps? Because I know a lot of people on the call are thinking about how they manage teams, how do they look out for people, how do they keep them motivated when they're not in the office once again. So do you have any practical sort of tips? I know it's about communications or about keeping in touch, but any sort of things you're doing in your department?
Okay, couple of things maybe. I suppose from day one, from the 13th of March, and when people moved out, I did a daily night in terms of what we're doing, how the department is responding. And I don't know how I did it, but I managed to keep going till the end of July, where we had an update every single day. We've now moved it to a weekly one. But again, it's to acknowledge and recognise just the sheer variety of what we do in this department, and so that people feel part of the big picture of what we deliver. So that was just, I suppose, a simpler one. We did a staff survey in the summer asking people for their views. So we've done things like sharing photos of people working from home. We've a fantastic innovation group in the department. And we've a fantastic that in effect we kind of handed over whatever we can do. We've done video series, we call it Connected, and we do that. We've done a lot of using our intranet and our IT staff supporting video technology. We brought in, and Shirley mentioned there again, we've done all of our internal promotions now on using video. The other things we've done is well-being, really important, where we've put in place, you know, Friday menus, things to connect people. Yesterday we did the internal recognition awards. I mentioned that already. Well-being has been hugely important for us. So we've done talks, we've had a whole series of lunchtime talks. We put in place diet and nutrition, the Foodie Friday I mentioned, our book club. We've a book club going. So a lot of it, I think, is very much staff leading this themselves, the good ideas. Yesterday, we've appointed our first innovation officer for the department. So again, great ideas coming from her. She's the one that thanks to Pear, setting up the diploma in innovation. So we expect great things there. So I think for us, Robert, a lot of it has been asking staff, what would help? What do you need? What can we support? What can we put in place? And just getting on with it in a very practical way, using all of the tools we have. I suppose the one thing is that I always push as well, and I meet obviously management board, but I meet all the senior managers regularly, is to keep that, to have to set aside time every single week to connect in with your team and make sure that people are connected. And like today I did an induction. We had 40 people coming into our department. That's really hard and really tricky for them. So really strong in terms of the connectedness. We're going to roll out a new connectedness program as well. So they're just some of the practical things I suppose we've done.
Thanks, Orlaigh, for that. Before I go to Julie Sinnamon, CEO of Enterprise Ireland, who's our last panelist, just to remind people that you can ask questions, and we're going to go to the questions after this round table. We're going to go and take some of your questions and hear feedback from people. So please keep those coming in. So Julie, sort of the same for yourself. You know, a big challenge for the enterprise sector. The business environment very challenging, difficult for you to engage with business in the way you would normally do that engagement. So you might just give us some sense of the challenges you faced and how you've been trying to overcome them.
Okay, thanks, Robert, and good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to see so many people tuning in this afternoon. So firstly, like everybody else here, we immediately had to start working from home. So there was a challenge in terms of shifting 800 plus staff out into working from home. We had a lot of the software and technology for years, but we hadn't really used it to work using Teams as our main method of operating. So after we get over the initial technology issues to make sure everybody was connected, it was a matter of dealing with not just business as usual and working from home, but our world had gone virtual and the Irish enterprise companies were all really struggling from liquidity issues. So as Orlaigh talked about the suite of new products, trying to address that with companies, Sustaining Enterprise Fund was developed, a lot of work with the department, with the EU to get that temporary framework in place to allow us to do it, and then operationalising a scheme like that. For many companies, they didn't have a business plan, they didn't have any ability to work out what they needed financially. So again, developing a financial plan, a planning grant to help companies with that initial problem. But everything had to shift to a virtual world. So all of our committees from the 13th of March went online, which has been terrific. Even when you then get an approval for a company, all of the documentation, all the legal letters, the letters of offer, there was nobody in the building to post out letters of offer, etc. So we had to move that to online, put in software for signing documents and making sure that we had secure systems in place to deal with that. Then when you're paying money to companies, the grant inspection side that you have to go through was all done online. And working through technology to be able to have the level of security that we needed and make those payments. All of our companies couldn't go into the marketplace, so the focus was on helping them to do business online, developing programs. How do you conduct business online? How do you close deals? How do you develop relationships? So changing all of the leadership programs that we would have run to a virtual community operating to do it. We had our International Market Week, for example, 2 weeks ago, and normally that would have meant all the staff from 40 offices around the world coming back to the RDS, bringing all the companies from all around Ireland into the RDS. We would have an opening event with whatever minister talking about, and supporting them. And there'd be about 250 companies typically in the RDS for that event. 2 weeks ago, it all was done virtually, over 2,000 meetings between the overseas offices and companies over the course of a week. An opening event with 1,600 people able to attend it, and massively positive feedback in terms of how that is operated. So it has really been a matter of using all of the learnings from this. And Orlaigh was talking about that connectivity. I mean, initially we were connecting every day with staff, even from a health and safety perspective, to check that they were okay. We probably have never had better communication in the organisation than we have now, in terms of, that again, trying to make up for the lack of community and connectivity as people, particularly younger people in the organisation, have been struggling with working from home. I would do a video now every week. There's been a call to action in terms of asking people to go beyond the call of duty to support Irish enterprise, work all the new schemes in addition to business as usual. So giving feedback to staff every week in terms of the new initiatives we've done, the progress we've made, the feedback that we're getting to encourage people to keep going, and that two-way communication as well, providing fora to allow staff to raise their issues and what wasn't working from them. In terms of the wellness piece, using some of the younger staff in the organisation who've done early morning sessions on mindfulness or yoga or keep fit classes, all being done virtually on an early basis, having competitions between teams in terms of step challenges and things, just again to try and build that sense of community as everybody is isolated and working at home. So a lot of technology solutions helping our companies in terms of webinars and all of that having to be done within a very short space of time, conducting all of our business virtually. So it's been, and things like the retailing scheme, Orlaigh mentioned the difficulties they have. Developing an online retail scheme to help companies that would have been outside of the normal sphere that Enterprise Ireland would work in, but trying to make sure that we were relevant to people who really needed support.
Like the level of innovation is astounding, even for small entities. So our golf club up the road here, they're closed from yesterday, but they've now developed a click and collect service where you can go online and in anticipation of golf starting again, you can go and buy things. And it's a small shop with a, Golf Pro and a few other people, and they've managed to set up an online offering literally overnight. So it's incredible how people have responded. Judy, just one question which we're all sort of grappling with is the future of work and attendance of office post-COVID. Yeah. So whenever we will get through this, the extent to which we'll have a blended approach to people working from home and working in the office. Do you have any thoughts on what that might look like?
I do. I mean, and even when I'm talking to some of the most traditional companies in Ireland who previously would never have thought that anybody could work from home. In fact, they would have thought if you were working from home, you were probably watching Netflix or something. And suddenly they were thrown into this virtual major social experiment that we've been living for the last 6 or 7 months. In my view, there are benefits. I mean, there are obviously issues with it from us, like the operational stuff, I would say is working really well. It's the strategic longer term relationship pieces. And in terms of trying to do the more creative work, which is, and the relationships, we're living off the relationships of the past. So I believe there will be some more blended approach going forward. I don't think we can move back to where we were. I think people will take the best of what we have done over the last number of months. As I look at, a lot of the time that we would have spent going to meetings, and when you do them virtually, they can operate very effectively. I think we're all zoomed out of it. So there's a happy medium somewhere along the way. But I do think that the likelihood is that it will be a blended approach going forward. And the big impact of that for a lot of our regional agenda is now that through a lot of the local enterprise areas, in terms of regional hubs that we would have supported under the Regional Enterprise Development Fund, there's a real place for that, because that can be the best of both worlds. People working in Dublin a couple of days a week and then working remotely, be it at home or in regional hubs. So I think it has really big implications for regional development going forward, as well as how the public sector and all other companies will operate. Some of the companies that we talked to that had difficulty getting skills in some rural parts now have people working remotely, and they're saying this can work going forward in a much wider basis. So I don't think we will turn the clock back when we eventually get some level of normality back to where we were. I think we will have to bring on board, and I think the sort of staged back to work that most companies are doing, where 50% are in the office, 50% are working remotely, that will be a really good transition to designing the appropriate process in the future.
Yeah, no, I think there's no going back to the way we did work. That's for sure, yeah. Julie. It's a question of what the balance is and what the mix is the real challenge. So, Breda, are you on the line there? Are people asking questions? Are there any questions you'd like to people who are listening in?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Hi, everyone. So there's so many questions and comments coming in. There's a lot of love for the Borrow Box. They agree with you, Robert. Also, well done to everyone in Fingal County Council from Mary O'D. So one of the first questions here is for Robert and for Orlaigh. We've just had a session on robots before this, and great medical tech uses by the HSE. But people like us in local government don't have access to new tech. Why don't we open up things like the Disruptive Technologies Fund to public bodies to solve problems?
Yeah, like this is something.
Orlaigh and Robert,
yeah, this is something that we've just started quite recently, Breda. But I think there's no reason why we can't extend that to the wider public service for local authorities and others to access it. No reason whatsoever. It's just that we tend to try something small scale initially to limit it to certain parts of the service, and then it works, we extend it. But I think areas like robotics, we're doing some things in revenue and other parts of the civil service, and that has wider applicability. So sure, we're open to extending those opportunities throughout the service.
Yeah, I could add to that. Yeah, do you want me to add to that, Robert?
Yes, please, Orlaigh.
Please, Orlaigh.
Yeah, so like robotics is obviously in play, as Robert said. We're putting through the biggest infrastructure project at the moment on the company's registration office using AI and robotics, which is 220,000 companies. So that's a big project for us. The Disruptive Technologies Fund, which we operate from the department here, is really important because what that does is it's a unique, and there's nowhere else in the world like it. It has to have two small and medium enterprises working together, plus say a university or another partner. It's what it is, it's disruptive technology. So the projects that they're doing, there's quite a lot on the pharma side, on climate change. We've just put out this third call for it, but they're big projects. They're projects of $1 million plus. So the purpose of that fund is positioning Ireland to compete globally and to build and scale the type of projects that have world impact. It's still in its early phases, and Robert mentioned it. It's still a trial well, not a trial. I mean, it's on its third call, but we're still waiting, I suppose, to see the full impact. But it's a hugely important. But the Disruptive Technology Fund, there's nothing to stop any of us across the public sector funding projects. And I think what we're doing across, and Robert mentioned revenue and other areas. I know the NSSO use robotics quite a lot at this stage as well. So to me, that's the future, and that's what makes life easy. And sometimes it's what takes some of the more mundane work out of the system and allows us to do the higher quality work. So absolutely, more of that is what we need to see to support us all. Thank you.
Right, and just for those who don't know that are tuning in, we have a robotics framework in place with the OGP, so you can find out more on ops2020.gov.ie. Robert, sorry, did you want to come in there?
No, any other questions from people? Breda, you might just fire to the members of the panel.
Okay, great. There's tons. So a comment for Shirley, really agree with done is better than perfect. And Francis O'Brien says the public jobs has made applying for a job much easier for public servants. Okay, Shane Brennan has asked, we're going to come out of this pandemic with a new hybrid public service. Are there discussions at a senior level as to what that might look like? Maybe Robert, do you want to start that one? Thanks.
I'm going to say I'm moderating this discussion, not answering the questions. I'm off. I'm sort of off today, but
I'll add if you like, Robert.
Mark, you go. You, Mark. You answer. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because we have we're exactly on that point within the Defence Forces, and I suppose the message is what we've put together are plan ahead teams, and the plan ahead teams are trying to look at the lessons we've learned from the learning to date in the lead up to the pandemic and during the pandemic. And I suppose the key phrase, and it's Rossa Mulcahy, our strategic planning branch head, has said we need to plan for a better normal, not a new normal. So rather than just being suboptimal or just looking at a future whereby there is a new normal set out, let's look for a world whereby it's better than what we had pre-COVID. And that's the actual vision, is we should be able to come up with social systems, service delivery systems, and a development system and competitive systems that make Ireland actually better than it was pre-COVID.
Could I mention there as well, Robert, just to say one of the areas we have within our remit is remote working, and we're doing a national policy on remote work. and we'll have that by the end of the year. So that picks up a lot of the issues that people have faced, and it addresses, you know, things like Julie said, how you work, but also things like safety and things like well-being. And so, as I say, we are working on that at a national policy level, and we'll have that by the end of the year. We've done a lot of consultation on it, and we've had a lot of really good feed-in from across both the public sector, but also in terms of enterprise, private sector as well. Thanks.
Can I just say on that, the words that Mark used, the better normal, and you know, if we look at, say, the DocuSign technology that we introduced, it took days, you know, where it used to take, you know, in some cases weeks and days to get contracts out to people, posting them, then sit in somebody's desk, and suddenly it's automated and it has become hours as opposed to days, or days instead of weeks. So I think the technological advances that we've made as a result of this crisis will live with us forever, as well as the remote working side. And we need to make sure that we don't lose any of those, so that we don't go back in terms of the old processes, as well as the remote working area.
No, I think it's a really good question, and it's something, just in response, my own response to the question, I think it will be very different. And one of the challenges, I think, in this crisis is that we need to create time and space to try to think about what the new future will be, what the new normal will be. And I know in a number of departments and offices there have teams now set aside to try to think about what their future will be. And it's about digital, remote working. It's issues like our cities, reimagining our cities. I think our cities are going to be very different in the future to what we thought they'd be. So what does that mean for transport policy, for planning? So I think there are lots of things that we have taken for granted that we thought would evolve in a certain way, which won't. And I think a big lesson from this crisis as well is the need for us to invest more in foresight and planning. So many of our systems worked well, and we were able to respond quickly. And Mark and Drew have mentioned some practical examples for the Defence Force and the Garda Síochána in the civil service in terms of payment systems worked very well, digital processes. So, but I think there is an opportunity for us to look and think about how we plan for future events and what lessons we can learn from this. But it's a good question. Okay. Anything else, Brita?
Yeah, I think Shirley just wanted to pop in there.
Shirley,
yeah, yeah, thanks, Robert. There was just one of the things I suppose that struck me, and I suppose when we think of even what we're doing today, when we were working with the various agencies, we were working with people that we hadn't met before or hadn't been introduced, or we were working with people who may have been familiar to us in our networks. But I suppose one of the things that really, really resonated with us was just that diversity and that diversity of thought. So as we developed relationships and as we were jointly problem solving and that type of thing, there was great input and richness for people coming from different sectors and different perspectives, applying themselves to solve a problem. And I'd like to think that this, if anything, that this is something that we'll definitely continue to try and harness that capability going forward, because we found it absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Okay. Rita, any other listening in?
Yeah, loads of questions. So Eamon Grimes has a question for Commissioner Harris and Vice Admiral Mellett. Are your members coming up with innovations on the front line that were surprising or unexpected?
If I go first there, yes. Well, what we found was obviously we had to maintain a very sort of operational footing as well. We're an essential service, and there was lots of work for us to do. But there was lots of ideas come up from our own staff about how they would manage stations, how they'd manage patrolling. And so one of the things we did was, this was as a result of suggestions that were put forward to the other two, we would have always paraded people at the same station. So, one unit would finish, another would start, and there would be an overlap. We changed the shift system to avoid that, but then we dislocated people from one station to the other. So in effect, then there's no overlap, and therefore then less risk of passing on COVID-19. people then also, and the suggestion was made and it was adopted, was buddying off with someone else, so that again, trying to constrain any transmission of the disease as well. But also then with quite a bit of innovation about the use of all the various means of communication and outreach then to the public. And probably, I think probably one of the best things was the local initiatives around the active identification of people who may be isolated, who may not approach us. You know, it wasn't as if we were always asking people to put their hand up. We were actively seeking out people who may be in some degree isolated. And there was a lot of just good, solid sort of work done at a local level about that. And really, like, the amount of direction that came from the centre in respect of that was minimal. We saw good practice, and that was spread out. So we were very pleased in the manner in which people put their own thinking caps on, realised what had to be done, and then tried to think of ways through and good new ways and innovative ways that they could work to meet our organisational requirements. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. Mark?
Following on Drew there, if Robert, if that's okay. I suppose we've, from day one, the big question we had is protection of our personnel, and that's not being selfish. That's simply a business continuity strategy. So we had to make sure that we were going to be there at the end, and so we designed our risk assessment around protection of personnel, so we can do a service delivery for state and protect the vulnerable. But so a lot of effort went into PPE. Before PPE was available, we actually had manufacturing using 3D printing. General Paddy Flynn and his team in 1 Brigade pioneered that. But also in terms of, as the services came out, we had to actually start transporting patients with the HSE. So we did innovation on vehicles, putting in protection within vehicles, whereby the drivers were able to have infected patients go into hospital, and at the same time there wasn't cross-contamination. We developed a whole pod system then, which has actually stood us in good stead. Even the actual, at the operational level, using ships as test centres. Ships in themselves are incubators, if you like. So there was a huge risk with that. But the mitigations we put in and the governance controls that were there and that have been codified now in terms of doctrine are there for the future. And we didn't have one infection in any of the test centres, despite the fact that we did tens of thousands of actually testing. And then I suppose at the kind of broader level, and myself and Jackie McCroom have put forward in terms of just a package of how the defence organisation responded to this as an innovation from an organisational perspective. And the real, I suppose, beauty about this is many in the past have been innovating from the bottom up, but the kind of coherence in terms of a policy level was not quite clear. What has happened with OPS 2020 over the past couple of years is that structure has been codified in a manner now. Not only is it coming bottom up, but it's hitting a support mechanism that is top down. And it really is, if you like, the bow or the icing on the cake. And yesterday or day before yesterday, we had our innovation awards, and we have had a number of successful bids through the Innovation Fund. So I think what's happened in terms of government in putting in place the structures have really been, if you like, a force multiplier in terms of institutionalizing innovation throughout the public sector. If I could add one final point, I remember a number of years ago, I was headed in the Navy talking about innovation, and I got pushback from a senior member in the organisation. He said, but we've always been innovating. And he was right, but we've been innovating within the silo of the Navy. What we've created now through OPS 2020 is network innovation, open source innovation, innovation in a diverse manner with disparate groupings coming in together and giving you that disruptive innovation possibility. So that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Well, it's a good point. I think these networks they take time and effort, but they are very, very valuable to listen to what other people are doing in other sectors and to learn from them, as well as learning from your own organisation, are really important. Rita, any other questions from people?
Yeah, I might merge the next two. So Louise O'Brien has a question about what skill gaps have been identified, has the pandemic threw up? And another question then on a similar vein, but for Shirley particularly, has the pandemic influenced the type of candidate or skills being selected for certain roles, for example, leadership roles?
Okay, well, I'll take that. So, look, we're still going through the pandemic at the moment, so we are still, I suppose, learning as we go. Obviously, yes, it has had an impact. What we're seeing is that, we're looking for people who, leaders who can network, influence, see the benefits of diversity and what that brings to the table. Leaders who can make sure that that they can manage teams appropriately from a remote setting. I think there's been a big mind shift in terms of, I think somebody mentioned it earlier on, where there was that perception, if I can't see what you're doing nothing. So I think there's that big mind shift around that managers actually, need to trust their employees, and we need to come up with mechanisms and things that we can both support employees and manage things like probation, manage things like performance conversations, so that ability to be able to manage teams on a remote basis is something I think that we will continue to see coming to the fore in terms of management competencies as we go forward. I just had an interesting innovation that we had, which I thought I'd share because it's quite good. Because obviously some of our processes are 2 or 3 stages. And I'm thinking back, we were doing the recruit prison officer, and at one phase of the recruit prison officer, we usually do a group exercise. So our psychologists had to come up with a new way of doing looking for the skills and that you would draw from conducting a group exercise, but obviously doing it on a remote setting. So we engaged, with the help of the prison service, we engaged actors who played out roles, and candidates interacted in a remote setting with those actors, and we assessed their ability to interact with prisoners and to deal with some of the situations that would present on a day-to-day basis for them. So I think that dynamic thinking, the ability to be creative and the ability to be agile is something that we will see as a necessary competencies in all of our leaders going forward.
Thanks, Shirley. I want to do AnnMarie or Julie want to come in on these issues of skills levels. Julie?
I was actually going to come in just on one of the points that Shirley made with regard to people working from home and if you can't see them, then are they doing anything? Actually, my experience over the last 7 months is there is much greater transparency in terms of the results and the impact of what people are doing, and it's much more obvious than the presenteeism bit when somebody's in the office. When you're working with them remotely, it's much easier to see what they are delivering. Actually, to the skills question, one of the things that I'd say, the problem-solving skill in terms of needing people who can actually see a problem and come up with a solution and bring the interpersonal skills to make it happen in terms of doing it. And I also think that the working remotely requires a different level of interaction with staff than working in the office, and so I think we need to realise the difference in working with people remotely, and that's something in terms of the skill set you'd be hiring for at management level.
Thanks, Julie.
Just come in there. I'll come in there, Robert, if it's okay. Just to Julie's point about the problem-solving skill, absolutely crucial right now. I'll give you an example. I think we were the first construction sites back on site. Social housing got a derogation early on, and one example was on the Monday, the first day, a painter in a house put a big sign at the bottom of the stairs saying, "I'm painting upstairs, don't come up," and that was his solution to COVID distancing and being able to continue to work. But engaging with the citizen is now going to be so much more difficult, and we can rely on digital technologies, and we secured funding through the Innovation Fund for a virtual 3D model, which would be, we didn't realise how much we'd be relying on that type of service going into the future. So as we are replanning the towns for cycling and pedestrianisation, for example, we can now model that up in a virtual way that is available constantly to the interested party. So a bit like a webinar, you can look in at it and explore it at on your own time and when you can, and then make your observations and comments. So we're finding we're reaching more people in that way, but that using that technology, which again we were just exploring when we applied for the Innovation Fund, is now going to be essential to our work. So then again, we can't rely on the digital to do everything, and a lot of our citizens can't participate as well as in that way of engagement with us. So back to problem solving through communication, whether it may be through publications that go direct to doors or whatever, but certainly as we are trying to promote projects, finding a way to reach people when we can't go back to the public events and the workshops that we'd usually rely on is something that we've had to adapt to quickly, or else we'd have to stop. We wouldn't be able to progress our projects. So I found where staff are willing to understand the problem and then go about solving it, you can keep going and get things delivered. So yeah, that problem solving is what we're looking for, certainly in Fingal.
Yeah,
can I just make one point on that AnnMarie touched on, which is procurement, right? And for years we used to say that we brought brilliant Irish companies around the world and they were able to do contracts, and they really struggled to get traction in Ireland and within the public sector. And the one thing that COVID has done is the level of engagement between Irish companies and the HSE is absolutely phenomenal, and they've really delivered great solutions to the needs. And as people now believe you need local solutions for some of these things, but they've been able to rise to the challenge and do it. So actually the issue of procurement in Ireland is on a different level than it has ever been in the last 6 months. So I'd just like to I often think that Brexit, the lasting legacy, will be a greater global footprint. COVID, the lasting legacy, will be access to that health system in Ireland like we've never had. So it's absolutely phenomenal what's happening.
Thanks, Julie. Well, I'm conscious of time and that there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue. We might be pushing up against it now. So we might just have one more question or one, Breda, and then we might go back to any of the panelists who want to say a final word, and then we'll wrap up. So Breda, anything else?
Yeah, there's a question about the various supports that we have in Deeper. How has the Innovation Fund and the various different supports helped your organisation to innovate in normal times and then in terms of developing your response to COVID?
So we might just, so it's thanks, Breda. So it's 14 minutes to now. So we might just wrap up with anybody who wants to make a final comment in relation to that question or anything else that springs to mind. And people don't have to come back in if they don't want to, but if anybody has a final comment, Drew.
Well, it's just, if you remember in late 2019, just within our own organisation, we launched Your Ideas, Innovation in Garda Síochána. And that was a real, really energetic effort to see about innovation and responses to, difficult and pernicious problems within Garda Síochána. And we got a huge response from that. And the only thing I would say about it is then when we reached then February, March, and we were having to think of new ways of working, we'd already sort of practiced the muscle about innovation, and that did make a difference. Some of the ideas did carry on forward, but actually just having created the atmosphere where people could make suggestions, and then organisationally we would run with good practice and propagate that throughout the Garda Síochána. That made a difference when faced with this crisis. We needed to do so much so differently. And I remember even just in the first weeks, the scramble to find PPE and very innovative ways then that we found and sourced PPE on the island of Ireland here, and that carried us through those first few weeks until supply started to settle, and that was all down about local action and people being going the extra mile to try and resolve issues. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Drew.
Maybe
Julie,
Just very briefly, I mean, the Innovation Scorecard we developed jointly with the Department of Public Expenditure and IDA, and we could have done it ourselves, but at the end of the day, by working through, it was funded through the Innovation Fund, and by us all collaborating on it, I actually think it's a better scorecard. It can help every organisation, public sector and private sector, to look at the level of innovation within it, and then where are the areas where they need to actually focus in order to the biggest gaps and address it. So those relationships and the public service network piece, the sharing of innovation and the way different organisations are working is really adding a lot of value within EI on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Julie. Orlaigh next, I think it's Mark.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Robert. I think what's really been important and what has helped is the emphasis that has been put on it across the civil and public service. So I head the innovation team with Julie, and that's across all of the sectors. And I think the work that you yourselves have done in terms of the dedicated innovation team, that drew from people across the various sectors. We seconded somebody from our own department, and Julie did too, so I'm looking forward to them coming back with all the experience that they have gained. But again, more importantly as well, when we talk about innovation, the money that has been put in the fund. So we're not just talking about it, we're funding it. And some of the projects that have come through have been really good. Interesting, we must have been foreseeing, because we won the award last year for how to make videos, and that has been hugely important in this COVID time. The other one, again, that focus on collaboration. We're doing one at the moment, an online climate action hub with the Department of Climate, with SEAI, EI and really trying to focus on that. So I think it's great to talk about it, but it's even better to have a team that supports and money to fund, and that makes it very real for people to get involved. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Orlaigh. Mark?
Yeah, just to say, I suppose we all know innovation requires that systematic the change in mindset, and what has happened in terms of it coming from the centre is that's happening. You're actually being rewarded for being innovative, and we've been successful in the fund on 2 occasions ourselves, but it also has legitimised and institutionalised innovation. And I think the real, I suppose, for the future is the link between innovation and risk. COVID-19 starts as a risk issue in terms of how you can bear it and how you can manage it and how you can mitigate it. But the positive side is how innovation then can actually get you out of trouble in terms of risk associated with it. I think it was Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. But what has happened, I think, with, I suppose, this flip in terms of risk tolerance is a lot of things that would have actually been analysed to death we're accepting a level of risk that's good enough and moving along and getting it done in record time. I think somebody mentioned that earlier on. And in our own organisation, what I've done is I've married our risk manager, Adrian Amuraku, also with innovation. So he carries both portfolios and things are getting done. So right down to the lowest level, to the lowest soldier or sailor or aircrew member in the organisation, they've now been empowered to come up with ideas. And that's what when I opened up earlier on, 75 individual contributions in terms of our Innovation Chief of Staff's Award this week, and those awards are gone out this week. And it's just extraordinary, whether it's the Air Corps, the Army or the Navy, just coming up from the bottom, but legitimised with regards to the centre policy and strategy that's there. And I just want to give a commendation to the innovation team in OPS 2020. Huge leadership there, and I think it is actually changing the face of the public sector within Ireland.
Thanks, Mark. I think AnnMarie wanted to come in. AnnMarie?
Yeah, just quickly, Robert, I suppose the key benefit of the Innovation Fund is it gives us the right to try things, try new things, and I suppose we hope to succeed, but sometimes you can fail as well. I suppose we support it so much that we've now established our own innovation fund in Fingal, trying to come up with ways to solve some of the problems we've identified over the last few months as we've moved to remote working. So, yeah, I think that that confidence to try things is really important. And back to the point about engaging with the market with procurement, I think that's a really legitimate thing to do, to basically engage with the market and see what the best solutions might be, as you're determining how you might approach a particular service delivery item or whatever. So yeah, that ability to try things out, I think, is important as an ethos throughout the public service.
Thanks, AnnMarie. No, I think that's a good point maybe to finish on. And it's been great to hear, and thank all the panelists for all your time and your insights and hard work. And I'd also like to thank the innovation team and also people on the call who work on all our departments and offices for all their work. It's been amazing really to see the response. We've tried to capture some today, but particularly the culture of innovation that we managed to develop or are developing, I think is really, really good and bodes well for the future. Just a final point for me. I was at the Public Accounts Committee yesterday, and I was never received so many complimentary remarks from deputies about the civil service, the public service, and how we've done over the last 6-7 months. We haven't got everything right, we know that, but we've done much that is really good and positive. So again, thank everybody for joining in. Thank the panelists, and thank our team at Deeper for hosting these events. Much appreciated. Okay, thank you.